I think it was a useful, very insightful combination of approaches there, from effectively from the DECC view in terms of what the key issues are in terms of the customer engagement. Then we heard from Steve in terms of the linkage with the other programs such as the Green Deal, and then we heard some very sort of straight retailer experience in terms of that engagement strategy, and how important it is to actually get the installation process right in terms of consumer engagement. That's only part of the story. Susan's just joined us. Susan is head of smart networks at npower. So really at this point, you've heard a lot of discussion and presentation. I'd like to open up to the floor, see if you've got any questions, please. Usual format, please. If you can state your name and where you're from at the front, that would be great.
Good morning, panel. My name is Eamon Conway from a company called Smart Homes. There's a lot of talk about consumer engagement and how important it is to get the consumer engagement, and the fact that the in-home display may or may not retain that engagement. Where does the panel see the opportunity for other smart products that might have the potential to retain that engagement as part of the smart rollout? So not just the smart meter in isolation, but other smart products that may help the consumer engagement.
Given that, for example, gas is such a large part of the utility bill, then all the products that help to reduce gas consumption, including some of the ones that you have, so the things that monitor boilers and allow them to fire more efficiently, and have temperature sensors in the homes and all of those things, they're going to play a significant role, because people think that you can get up to sort of 20% savings on the gas bill as a result of some of those products. And some of the information that's available from those products will also fuel the ability to give more insight to consumers about how they spend. So I think some of the gas efficiency things will be huge, and I think the market's yet to discover how some of the adjacent markets opportunities will materialize, like the home security and home health and home safety.
I'll just back up what Sue said. Yeah, I think it comes back to, I think I said, customers want us to make it simple. So if some of these, appliances can actually do stuff for the customer without them really having to think about it, that's what they're looking for. So yes, I think it's absolutely vital. We need to try and integrate them all and use the same communications. But it is that simplicity. If it adds more complexity, I think consumers might sort of step away from them. But if you can keep it simple, does it for them, but it doesn't really, they don't even feel it and it doesn't affect them, I think that would be absolutely the point.
I think that's absolutely key, and it was really interesting to hear that British Gas have already tried doing some interoperability with our solution that's in there. It's a surprise to us, which is great, and it works, which is a bigger surprise for us. So what that tells you, though, and I think this is the really important piece, is, and I'll say it before Sean does, about data opt-in for consumers. If the consumer is prepared to allow things in their home to access the data that their metering is creating, the basis is there with the sort of home area network spec that we're working on. The basis is there to allow almost anything to listen to and work with that data. And so what you effectively have is a very, very free market for almost anything that can offer a consumer a benefit. So Sue's right in terms of the things that will initially offer real benefit there. But if you look at the long-term engagement tools, I think we're right at the very start of a growth market there for lots and lots of different application-based solutions or physical solutions that let consumers do more with what they have.
I guess there's a little bit around, just quickly on the kind of myth busting though, because I guess there's always a fear that what might come out to consumers, what the message they may hear is actually people are going to take control of my life, and that would be something that we wouldn't want to see. So that's got something to be noteful of.
And I think this is very much about promoting innovation and competition, and I think we'll have failed if, by the end of the rollout, all everybody's got is the kind of government-mandated IHD in their homes. That we expect iPods and all sorts of interfaces and heating controls and smart appliances. that market's going to burgeon. We're starting with the IHD to make sure at the beginning everybody has got something that they can interface with, and making sure that the technology and the HAN and the interfaces are there so that other things can easily hook on is key to getting those wider benefits.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of those points, and I think we're clearly an advocate of technology beyond the meter. I think one of the things that we shouldn't underestimate, though, is that in itself, the installation and rollout of smart metering is a huge technical undertaking, and there are still so many question marks surrounding it. And I think we should be excited about things beyond the meter, but we should also look to get the balance right. When is the time, and how do we get the balance between investing attention that moves away from those fundamental basics that both myself and Sian touched upon. And I think what we need to avoid doing is rushing out to create gadgets and gizmos that ultimately either fail in what they're aiming to do, just simply because we want to try to give customers new toys to play with on a constant stream basis. So we absolutely support that at E.ON, but we've got to get the timing and the prioritisation right of those other devices. I think is key.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor, please? Chap at the back.
Hello, my name is Mohan Iyengar from Deloitte. Can I ask a question that may be slightly provocative, but here we go. Is that many of the speeches, both here and yesterday, talked about still big risks and formidable obstacles still to be addressed. And we've got 7 years to go before the deadline on this. So the question bluntly is, are we now where we should be, or are we 3 years behind where we should be?
Maxine, do you want to?
I mean, I think we are where we should be, and the foundation is a really critical period for learning and making sure that we are understanding any of those risks and sorting them out. I mean, I think it's the message from both Sian and Simon.
We think we're where we should be.
They're definitely where they should be.
I don't know if every supplier is where they should be.
I hope other suppliers are working out how they're going to make sure that they've got enough time to do that learning and get to 2019. But these guys are being very good about sharing a lot of their learning so that the industry is able to take that forward.
And Mo, I think it's a really good point, and it's a good question, because if we look at our plan for next year, as well as doing lots of test and learn activity around propositions, one of the key tests for next year is, can we build scale and gather momentum? Because if we don't do that next year and into 2013, by the time we get to 2014, I think we'll be way behind the curve. So I don't think we've yet gone past the point where we've fallen behind, but I think my message would be, we've got to keep the momentum going, and we've got to keep the pace of change coming through. And I think the point I made earlier on in my talk around, we've got to keep the day-to-day energy industry running whilst doing all of this, and keeping that industry running in itself today is a huge challenge. So if we slow down, I think we really fear creating a bottleneck for later in the decade.
Yeah. I echo that, but I think we have to do it right as well, and we mustn't lose sight of the danger of going too fast in some cases, or too much towards scale in some places, and making the experience bad for the consumer and the possible backlash that will cause. So there is a balance, I think.
I absolutely agree, and I think Sian raised on the point earlier on, which I think was key, which is that customers actually, that we found, really are quite liking the experience. They're liking the technology. I think some of them are also asking the question as to why did we not do some of this stuff sooner, compared to other industries. So I think it's a really fair point, and I think so long as we create control and frameworks that surround it, I think customers are actually waiting and expecting more from us.
Yeah. I think Mohan raised a good point about the bottleneck, but actually it feels more to me that you would not, it's almost like, can you scale so quickly if you don't get going now? And I think when we looked at just some of the numbers of, we call them energy experts, but engineers, technical guys, to fit the meters, you almost couldn't recruit them fast enough to fit them if we didn't get going at the sort of pace we're doing now. So it's a bottleneck, or is it, that you just couldn't, physically install fast enough?
I think I think it's a really good question, and I think the fact that you've got very differing views tells you that it's a good question. So you did well, because the first question was a cracker as well. But I think we are in a good position in terms of the rollout, provided that we capitalise on the things that have happened over the last couple of years. And I think the big challenge for us over the next 2 years isn't going to be in the technology, and even though scaling resource is very key over that period as well, actually that's not really going to be industry's biggest challenge. The single biggest challenge is going to be figuring out how we get that communication out to customers in a cohesive way over the next 2 years. Because all the basics are there. The nuts and bolts, BG or E.ON, the other suppliers, have all figured out what they need to do. Yes, they have varying degrees of readiness for it, but they know what they need to do largely. The big challenge is figuring out how we take that message cohesively to customers. Because if it looks like 6 or 7 or 20 different messages going out to industry about what smart's going to be, and you're all living in the same street, it's going to be pretty confusing. So getting a cohesive view, which is going to cut across a lot of commercial and competition boundaries, is going to be quite challenging. It's a softer side of the SMART programme, but it's a big challenge to solve.
I'd like to echo that. I think it is a huge challenge, and a plea to the government, perhaps, to that utilities are always being kind of banded as kind of the bad beasts. But I mean, what consumer is going to want to let a utility that's just been slated for the last 6 months into their home to do the smart meters? I think collectively we have to try and present the industry as trying to do something, good for the consumer. That we're trying to get towards price transparency and to a more trusted industry, and that the smart meters and the data are going to be another step on that path to giving them the insight that will help them get clarity and reduce their expenditure. But maybe you could help us too.
I guess one of the key things for me in all this is that the impact analysis is not just based on installing the smart meter. People have to act on it beyond that. Yes. So there's a customer engagement prior to the meter being installed, and there's the ongoing customer engagement, which is multifaceted. Any other questions from the floor, please? Gentleman down in the front.
Paul Clarkson, Weekly Associates. This one's really directed at British Gas, and I'm just curious, sort of knowing the sectors, why British Gas took the decision to go early when a good proportion of your competitors have yet still to go. They might well have the technology ready, they might have trials, and most do, but what was the driver to go early?
Yeah. I think we always saw that smart was going to be a positive thing, both for, we just talked about, messaging in terms of the industry, but also for our customers. And so for us, it was, yes, there are going to be industry timelines and industry targets, but actually smart is positive for our customers right now. So, let's start out, let's roll it out, and let's get going with it. So, we actually saw it as a business strategy to go rather than something that was going to be done to us by the industry. And that was really why we've had the go early strategy, and it has been hugely supported by Centrica Board and British Gas as part of our positive change in customer engagement with British Gas. So, yeah, that's.
I think in terms of British Gas's approach, and I think from our point of view, we're clearly stepping up the progress with Smart. We are obviously really keen to interact and work alongside DECC and our competitors to formulate the plan for the Smart rollout. And I think one of the key things that's come to light over the last 9 months since we've started our trials is that as we've been involved in some of those groups, I actually think some of our opinions have changed and been polarised by some of the things that we've learned. So I think part of our ambition for going early is also to bring credible information and to bring credible foresight into some of those really important policy decisions. We can't do that simply looking at Excel and looking at those decision trees and looking at the models that suggest how it may happen. And I'm sure a number of people in the room, especially those analytically in the room, that would disagree with me on that. But I don't think I've seen a single model yet at E.ON that when we've actually put it into practice is probably within 10% of what we thought it would look like. And I think we've got some pretty good analysts ourselves. So I really think that the going early is not just about getting a volume and trying to force things to happen. I think it's about credibly shaping the debate.
Yeah, and that's really valid. And Maxine talked about, we've been quite open with our, what we have learnt with DECC so that we can inform decisions and whether it's policy or just generally inform other industry parties around the sort of findings we've had. we keep learning too. It's that a positive way, you just keep finding information, either it's about customers or processes that you just didn't expect, and learn from it. So.
And you wouldn't have had the position that we have at the moment as well. If it hadn't been for the programs that these guys are running, you wouldn't have the shared base of open standards for the kit that's going into people's homes. That's a pretty big step for the industry to have taken. So it's part of the same learning process, which is if you don't know what you don't know, you won't be ready for the scale of rollout that we have to achieve.
Any more questions? Oh, yeah, sorry, over there. Thanks.
Thanks, John Bird, Northern Power Grid. Sean echoed something I think was said earlier on yesterday, but that the message that, at least at the moment, that will appeal to customers is saving cost and improving convenience. How will you be able to maintain that support and credibility, given that price increases of the sort we've seen over the last few weeks are bound to happen again, and customers will feel that Smart isn't delivering?
Would like to take that one?
Sean may well have something to add on this. I think we're not pushing a message about this is going to save you money, because, as I said, the sort of sums that we're talking about don't get customers very excited. So I think for us, if we're beginning to have an emerging, consistent message, it's about putting you in control. So at the minute, consumers have the largest bill that they face, something like £1,000 for the two fuels put together, and no idea at all what is driving it, how much it's building up, and what they're going to owe. So this sense that it's a bit more now like other things that you buy, you will be able to see, you will be able to understand what's causing those bills, and that puts you in control of that expenditure, is the kind of message that I think we're much more shaping, and is more resilient to the fact that prices will go up, as they inevitably will.
I think, it is. You start off with the awareness, don't you? And then it really, after that, it's some customers will just stay there. They won't want to go any further. They'll understand it, and that will be enough for them. Others will want to take action and take steps to reduce their energy consumption. And that might be something quite simple, based on advice and behavioural changes. But other customers will want to take it all the way, eventually to microgen. And I guess if prices do increase further, there will be more customers who go up that journey and will be willing to make the investment, and whether it's through fit or But Maxine's right, the smart meter will give them the awareness, but at least that's the start to make some decisions from. You need information to make decisions, and right now they don't, consumers don't even have that information. So, but it does need to be personalised. I think that is quite key.
And I think the trap that we've got to make sure we don't fall into, John, based on your question, is that if we message based on the fact that a smart meter will save people money, then we will have failed, because the smart meter is the enabler. And coming back to the original question from the gentleman at the start, it's through the foundation period, if we can get the fundamental basics nailed, it then opens the door for the new technologies, and they will be the things in our view that will genuinely help customers drive down their usage and their consumption, and the smart meter almost falls into the background slightly as just some clever bit of kit that sits under the stairs. And I think the message to customers probably needs to be less about get yourself a smart meter and more about look at this world that we can bring to you if you come on this journey with us, and I think that's key.
But there's an awful lot of other support needed, as just in the building industry and through the Green Deal, and that's going to support all this as well. And that's why, you do see Smart and Green Deal quite interlinked, actually.
It's the complete cultural change, effectively. If you look at it as a microcosm, we need people to start treating their houses like they're their cars, and they need to start treating energy as if it was petrol they put in their cars. Because actually, intellectually, everybody manages to understand that doesn't matter how quickly the price of petrol or diesel goes up, if you buy an economical car, you will save more money than if you buy an uneconomical one. So it's not a difficult message to translate, provided we give them the tools to work with the information.
Just to build on that point, because I think in some respects we may have also copped out answering a key point of your question, which was around the very realism that prices continue to rise, and how do we make sure that we don't create the wrong perceptions. And I think, and I probably speak for most of the energy companies we've been battered in the last 3 months around this, we have genuinely got to look at the messaging that we put out there when we change our prices, and we have got to be both more transparent and more honest in what makes the price different and what makes it go up. And I think too often as an industry we've sort of sat behind changing wholesale prices, and we have to pass that cost through. We've absorbed it for as long as we can, and instead we probably need to change the tune a bit more. I'll probably get shot for saying it from our chief exec, Tony Cocker, but we've just pressed the reset button in our business around looking at how we message price change and how we message the costs that we know are coming to customers in the future. I don't have the answer to that, but I think the point around being more truthful and more transparent around the price change message, and where it does genuinely link to smart, we need to get better at.
And just to add, I think there's two other things we could do. I think that when we communicate the price changes, we could be better between us at explaining what's driving the price change, because I think the consumers just assume the utilities are just pocketing lots of extra margin. It's a general national perception, and we could be better at messaging what's actually driving the prices up. And the second thing is that I think more tailored messaging about what's going on with our energy will help. So, for example, you could extract the impact of price versus temperature on this year's energy bill versus last year, and you could show them what the component is of price versus their actual usage change. So you could still explain to them in pounds what their usage changes have achieved for them.
I think Charles Hedry mentioned yesterday he sees this as an opportunity to restore faith in the industry. Yes, so that's actually a key thing.
David Farr from SSE. Question for Steve, if you would, Steve, and talk about your whole industry rather than just necessarily Landis+Gyr. 65 million metres in England. Perhaps, I don't make a guess of Europe, 800 million metres. Can your industry supply those? Are you completely confident?
So I guess our industry's had plenty of time to come to grips with the fact that the UK will change out 53 million metres plus associated devices over the next few years. We've got a wave of smart metering deployments that will happen across Europe, France, Germany, and more to come. So we'd be pretty dumb if as an industry we hadn't looked at that and planned for the capacity. I can't speak for any of my colleagues in the industry in terms of their preparations, but certainly our preparations allow us to have a reasonable share of the market and still continue to supply at the level that industry will need it. So we're pretty comfortable that we have plans in place. I think if you look at the industry that supplies us, clearly over the last few years, it went through a very low point in terms of production capacity. So if you look at the industry that supplies PCBAs, raw materials, basic components, then it did downsize post-2008. That capacity started to come back. I think it is a key point for government, though, and it's something that I think everybody in the industry has been pushing DECC very hard on, which is the more confidence any given market has, the more likely it is to be able to book that production capacity. And so when you look at mandated national rollouts that are very much a single supplier in a single territory that has huge call on industry, and it can turn around, as the RDF are able to do, and say, right, we're going to deploy meters to all of these homes, so I need a supply chain for that today, then it gives them a different degree of leverage. I think the UK's competitive market and the fact that we're not quite yet at the point where we can turn around to a supply chain as a country and say we need to book that production space. It does give us some challenges, but if you look at the net way that the various waves across Europe look like they will happen, I think we're probably going to be in quite a good position for the fairly high-tech equipment that we need for the UK.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question, if there is one. Okay.
Hi there, Gareth Williams, British Gas. Yesterday, npower questioned the quality of foundation deployments, especially around the consumer impacts on change of supplier. So my question for the panel is, during foundation, how can we ensure quality services maintained?
So do you got named in dispatches there. Would you like to take that one?
Thanks. I probably have Neil Pennington to thank for that, I'm guessing. I think our concern on interoperability is that if we try to do too much scale-wise, then the systems and processes that might be fine in small scale may not be robust enough as you ramp it up, and that the DCC, its whole purpose is to do interoperability at scale. And if we end up trying to ramp up volumes prior to the DCC and then trying to come up with solutions that they may not be robust enough, and then all the issues about all the issues about kind of right first time and getting it right and a good experience for the customer come to the fray. And we're also slightly worried about the competitive dynamics in that we favour a fully open market for all aspects of the pieces in the jigsaw as it comes into being, and we think that there needs to be full competition amongst the operators providing the interoperability, not just amongst the suppliers, so that if one operator happens to manage to get to critical mass of having most of the suppliers as their customers and therefore can create interoperability between them, that's great and it's fine for small volumes, but you still need good interoperability between them and the other operators if you're going to have a competitive market. So those are just some of our thoughts.
I sense there might be another review around the panel on that. So.
Yeah.
I stamp my feet on this one quite a lot, and the reason I stamp my feet is we've spent the last 2.5 years as an industry trying to figure out how you make the basic components of smart be interoperable. Totally different, I think, to every other market that's gone smart so far. In the UK, there is no excuse for anybody to set out to deploy systems that aren't interoperable. If you then have the kit that's going into people's homes and the way that it talks to networks and to head-end systems interoperable at that installed level, then okay, there might be one or other supplier of interoperability services today, commercial interoperability services, that has a dominance in the market, that has an ability to own more of those exchanges than another might today. But I don't think that disadvantages any of the organizations bidding for the DCC roles, because everybody will face the same challenge, which is the foundation piece is a drop in the ocean. It's very, very small. Even at the best possible case for foundation, we might do 10 or 12% of the whole base in foundation. That means 88% plus of the whole of the UK's deployment is left to go. And if anybody sitting around this audience thinks that 12% will make the difference in being able to prove that you can scale to 100% of that market, then you haven't looked at many IT deployments. And I just, it just feels very wrong for me to be trying to second guess where that market may end up. I appreciate that we have to be careful about it, but as long as the things that you deploy today, as long as you're not closing off avenues with what you put out into the market, then actually it's a very, very open playing field for anybody supplying DCC data services, supplying DCC communication services, and actually for supplying kit that gets deployed. I think we're one of the most open markets in the world in terms of the ability for a new manufacturer or a new supplier of service or technology to come into this market and say, I'd like to make one of those, so I'm going to sit down and design one, because they can design it confident that it will work.
Clearly, we're a great supporter of foundation interoperability. We did the very small trial, and it was small, and the communication between the kit was very, very straightforward, as Steve just said. No issues at all. And I guess I agree that customer experience is paramount, but right now, the customer experience is if you change supplier as a smart metering customer, you lose your smart benefits. And I don't think that's a great customer experience. And also goes against competition in some ways, and the customers may not want to change supplier because they might lose their smart experience. And I would love to be able to offer customers that I acquire with a smart meter exactly the same experience and benefits that I offer the smart metering customers that British Gas installed the meter to. That would be what I think would be a great customer experience for them. So.
Yeah, I won't repeat the points they made. I think they're all really valid. I think coming back to the point around quality and that change of supply process, I don't think we're intending to do anything that means the physical change of supply process becomes either more painful or more difficult for a customer to transfer from one supplier to the next. Clearly, what benefits they have with other suppliers, we don't necessarily have control over that. I think when we look at interoperability and when we look at customers having the benefits of smart, I'm actually really quite intrigued to see what the customer reaction is, because for so long we've been told in our industry that customers move because of price. It's the price that drives the movement around the industry. And I think that it'll be interesting to see what premium customers do put, even the small pockets of customers that we're trialling with now, what premium they do put on that accurate bill versus a price or a different type of proposition that's offered elsewhere. But I think you're right. I think in terms of going up to mass scale without a responsible interoperability policy could be quite damaging, and I think it goes against this thing around building trust for the customer. But again, it comes back to the messaging. We've got to be really transparent as to some of the limitations that we have at the minute, and we've got to recognise that if we had all the solutions, if this programme was done and dusted and we just needed to get on and deliver it, then we obviously wouldn't all be sat here today. So unless we take some of these chances, unless we take some of these calculated risks, I think we fear not actually doing anything because we're thinking, well, we can't please everybody.
Yeah, just to be clear, npower's not saying we don't do anything. I mean, we fully believe we need interoperability and we want it. It was just a question of at how much scale and at what point do you start to run into issues, and just you know that there are some issues there.
Yes, and I think we've always recognised as well, you know, if you ended up with 20 million metres in foundation, we'd have a big problem. But I think at the kind of scale that we're talking about, we believe it's manageable. But, you know, it is one of the things that we need to make sure is a good part of the experience. Ofgem's spring package, as was really trying to say there are some things we need to make sure we get right in terms of consumer protection in these very early stages. And they're still looking at the kind of regulatory backstops that might be needed to make sure that that works. So, you know, there is a recognition it's something we've got to get right, but the benefits from foundation in terms of ensuring the quality of experience across the piece, I think is worth that. But we don't want that disrupted by poor interoperability experience, but I think we can sort that.
Okay, and I guess there's the neat little segue in terms of the technical interoperability and commercial operability, which we'll be discussing in the next session. So I'd like to thank the speakers and the panel for that interesting session. Thank you.